Welcome to Sound Faith News. I'm Tyson James, and I am joined today by Corey Miller. He's the president and CEO of Ratio Christi, an apologetics organization that seeks to equip college students and faculty to defend the faith and share their faith with others on university campuses. Recently, Ratio Christi made headlines by winning a significant suit on the First Amendment freedoms of religious student groups on college campuses. So let me bring on Dr. Corey Miller. Corey, first of all, congratulations on this huge win. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here, Tyson, and excited to share more.
Awesome. So, first of all, can you just give us a quick synopsis of how this all came about? Who filed the suit and why did they do it?
The group that filed it was Americans United Against the Separation for Church and State. They filed it on behalf of the Secular Student Alliance, which is sort of a counterpart of us on secular university campuses. And they did so strategically on Trump's last day in office of his first presidential administration. They did so because they felt that President Joe Biden coming into office would then probably give them whatever they wanted. They saw this rule that Trump, in his first administration under the Betsy DeVos Department of Education at the time, put this rule in the system that would protect campus organizations or Christian campus organizations, perhaps in particular, from discrimination by universities that would discriminate and not give them the resources or the recognition they might need. And we have been targeted many times in those ways. So they were going to protect us. But the atheists who were filing suit saw that rule, that free inquiry rule, as it was called, was going to be used by organizations like us to, in fact, discriminate against trans people or gay people or someone that didn't agree with our viewpoint. And so they were saying we should be able to discriminate against people like Ratio Christi so that Ratio Christi will never discriminate against anybody.
Mm. Now, Ratio Christi, you guys have tons of chapters on college campuses all over the US and other countries. Uh, did this suit involve any particular university, if you're allowed to say?
No, I'm allowed to say there was no particular university on this one. In the documents filed by Alliance Defending Freedom, who took our case, they had mentioned other cases where we have, in fact, been targets. We have it's not our modus operandi, but I have had over 150 legal inquiries, over a dozen just at the beginning of this semester alone. With that, we've had 4 federal victories, 5 appellate court victories, 2 SCOTUS assists, 1 win out of the Ninth Circuit Court, and now this one with the Biden Department of Education.
Mm. You mentioned Alliance for Defending Freedom.
Mhm.
They represented Ratio Christi in this suit. Why was it that they decided to take up the suit to begin with?
Well, Alliance Defending Freedom is primarily about the First Amendment, about free speech, about free academic freedom, about freedom of association, freedom of assembly. It's about the First Amendment. That is the number one within the Bill of Rights. It's the most important that sort of defines the DNA of our rights as citizens in the US Constitution. And for us in particular, they want to see that Christians have an equal playing field as everybody else. We are citizens of the United States. A lot of people forget that. And so it's up to groups like us to contact Alliance Defending Freedom, who then know the system and can help us give some of these rogue administrations continuing education about that little piece of parchment called the US Constitution, which is the law of the land that we want to honor.
You mentioned prior litigation and cases that Ratio Christi has been involved in. Has ADF represented Ratio Christi in all of those, or just some of those?
Yeah, I mean, from a personal anecdotal story, as an ethics professor, they came in to take my case pro bono when I was at Indiana University, charged with creating a suicidal environment. simply because I gave both perspectives on homosexuality, even though I would always require all and only opposition authors for textbooks, like atheist authors. From personal anecdotal stories to uh, universities like Colorado, University of Iowa, Iowa State University, University of Nebraska, ones in Georgia, a number of different ones. They've taken our cases, and every single time we have won, because what we're doing is just, Tyson, really trying to say we deserve to be treated inclusively like every other campus or club. And sometimes it's a matter of student funding that they give to other groups, but they won't give to us. Sometimes it's a matter of speech codes. Thou shalt not say words that are politically incorrect, or speech zones. We require you to be in the back of the campus behind a bush where no one's ever going to see you, and allow all these other people with our worldview to be up front on the biggest stage possible. Or the more famous one, for lack of a better term, the all comers policy. And that's kind of what this was about. And that is, look, we say that we don't discriminate against people in unhealthy ways. We do require that our leaders be Christians. Meat eaters or vegetarian groups might require that their leaders, their officers, not be meat eaters, or Jewish groups might require that their leaders be Jewish people and not neo-Nazis. It seems commonsensical. Why can't Christians require that their leaders be Christians and believe Christian things that we've believed for thousands of years, even for the last several hundred years, on most of the university campuses in the United States that we Christians started? Can't we at least be treated fairly?
It does seem that the university used to be a place where differing ideologies could be explored openly, that there was a marketplace of ideas, that these ideas were tested and contrasted and compared openly. And it doesn't seem to be that way anymore. I'm wondering, and it does seem like there's a specific prejudice against religious beliefs as well, as we've seen with this suit. So, do you agree with that assessment that there's been a shift in the openness of the universities to differing ideologies? And if so, what do you think caused that shift?
I have a book coming out on that. That's a long story. But yes, there is definitely a hostility toward Christian belief, conservative Christian belief in principles that we would maybe conserve for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Uh, but I would say that, in the mid 1990s, you would have had the ratio of, say, liberal to conservative professors being 2.3 to 1. You can find that in books from Jonathan Haidt, an atheist psychologist, New York Times bestseller, to um, Steven Pinker at Harvard, a psychologist, and so forth. So these are statistics that are publicly available. Something in the 90s gave way, and there was a radical push that began to happen from that ratio of liberal to conservative that ended up to this last decade being um, 12 to 1 for those who are on their way out going to retire, 60 years old and older. But for those faculty coming in at age 40 and under, it's 23 to 1. In New England, where the Ivy Leagues are at, it's 27 to 1. And when parents often hear this, they think, oh my goodness, I'm going to send Johnny to the university. Harold, we need to make sure he takes a religion class. I say, no, you don't want to do that. There, it's 70 to 1. And so when you get those kinds of ratios, Tyson, you end up having political, theological, philosophical orthodoxy. You get blasphemy laws. You get a marketplace for the competition of true ideas. Debate is now hate, and those who violate them with certain words or certain thoughts. It's not just free speech anymore. It's free thinking. The atheists used to be the free thinkers. Now that is the Christian. And so they want our money and they want our children, but they do not want our influence in the universities. That has not helped anyone, because even Voltaire, the deist, used to say something to the effect that I may disagree with your views, but I would defend to the death your right to express them. Well, someone like Stalin would come along and popularly it was said that he claimed ideas are more powerful than weapons. We may not, we don't want our enemies to have weapons. Why should we let them have ideas? So this Marxist ideology that is infiltrated right as this ratio, this radical ratio is changing, so was a new ideology from scientific naturalism that had reigned for over a century, now to a postmodern cultural Marxism. And right at the crest of the wave, they were starting to dominate, and they don't believe in debate. They think debate is hate, and they don't want all ideas shared. And so they started to enforce their viewpoints through DEI or DIE expression and so forth into math, into medicine, into engineering, moving away from the social sciences and the humanities into the hard sciences. And from there, it moved from campus to culture to the corporate world to the churches and everybody else, such that we all live on campus today.
I can imagine, going back to the suit, that there are some Christians who might think this is the wrong approach, that we should avoid court because it might be interpreted as retaliation, and that we should settle things in a different way. For instance, Jesus taught us to turn the other cheek when we've been struck, right? So, if someone were to say that to you, what would be your response?
I would say, first of all, hermeneutics, theory of interpretation. We need to have right interpretation of Scripture. So we have not a lot said about the believer's relationship to government in the New Testament. In 1 Peter 2:13 and following, and in Romans 13 and following, Paul and Peter both talk about government, where government is a minister of justice, not a minister of compassion, for example, that comes along to bring about not compassion, but justice for evil doing. And then you have Paul talking about litigation in 1 Corinthians 6, where he says, can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers? But brother goes against brother to go to court and so forth. Those things need to be interpreted in their context. We don't need to be airing dirty laundry out there. We don't need to have secularists come in and adjudicate when we ought to be able to do that ourselves with the Word of God and with proper counsel. It doesn't mean, however, that we should not sue anybody, organizations. It's a brother and an organization are different. And also, we need to be thinking about, obeying the laws of the land. And the laws of the land, when it says, you ought to be in subjection to governing authorities, and the universities said X, therefore you ought to be in subjection. No, certain authorities do conflict. And we believe as Christians, any authority, whether parental, ecclesial, civil, or whatever, any authority that commands us to do that which God forbids or forbids us to do that which God requires, we have grounds to disobey those authorities. Peter said, you want me to stop preaching the gospel, but I would rather obey God than man, for example. Here we have a hierarchy of authorities. The ultimate authority is not the university. The word Paul uses there is plural in authorities. The highest authority in the law of the land is the U.S. Constitution. So we're merely doing as Paul did, not what Jesus did, in making our appeal to Caesar. Jesus could have done that, but Jesus had a different mission in life as the Messiah. We don't want to say, what would Jesus do for everything? For example, I have 3 children at home, 3 biological children at home, which presupposes I had sexual intercourse. Hopefully it was with my wife, and it was, and I have 3 kids. Well, Jesus wouldn't have done that, unless it was the Mormon Jesus, of course, but the biblical Jesus wouldn't have done that. It doesn't mean Christians shouldn't become fathers and have intercourse. We're told to be fruitful and multiply by the same God in Christ earlier. Um, Jesus, what would it mean to be a police officer? Would it mean you could defend someone? Or when someone's about to get stabbed, you should just tell the criminal, or the victim rather, turn the other cheek, right? Or someone who's getting burned alive on a New York subway. If you saw that happening, should you come along and say to the victim, turn the other cheek? That's what Jesus would do. That's not what Jesus meant. So we can get into and look at the commentaries in the context. That's not the idea behind that. What would Paul do? He would litigate the heck out of people for his rights as a Roman citizen, and he did make appeal to Caesar. These rights are universal for U.S. citizens in our jurisdiction as United States citizens. We have certain rights under the Bill of Rights, and it's the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly. All we're doing is simply going to a higher authority, which is the law of the land, and asking them to weigh in, not as a person to person, but as an organization for the justice of all. The government in Romans 13 and in 1 Peter 2 is the minister of justice.
You became president of Ratio Christi in 2015, is that correct?
Right. Yep.
Right. So it's been about 10 years now.
Yep.
So you've been the president through several different U.S. administrations. It sounds like starting with President Obama, and then Trump, and then Biden, and now you'll have another uh, uh, term of Donald Trump. So in that time, have you seen any correlation in the relationship between the university and religious Ratio Christi and the university on the one hand, and the type of administration that the U.S. has on the other?
Oh, yes. I've seen this since the beginning. The water temperature has gotten hotter and hotter. We were given a reprieve during Trump's first presidency, but we've been kicked off of, say, Cal State universities. We were kicked off there for almost 7 years simply because we would not bend the knee to the insistence that anybody should be allowed to be a student president of Ratio Christi. We say, no, we're a Christian organization. We think anybody can come. One of our chapters probably has more trans than it does cisgender, so to speak. Another chapter has more skeptics than Christians. We don't discriminate. We have great conversations with everyone that comes along, but we insist that our leaders are actually Christians because we're a Christian organization, like a Jewish organization would be granted, like a vegetarian organization would be granted. But yes, we've seen this all along. We saw that our attorneys were emboldened when Trump was at the helm in the first presidential administration. And we saw that Trump changed the judiciary. We would have been crazy to litigate in the Ninth Circuit. And yet we did with a couple of other campus ministries after Trump changed the judiciary in the Ninth Circuit, and we won. And through that case, we're able to liberate everybody and in principle, get us back on the Cal State University campuses. I think people right now, our viewers right now, can see everybody is scrambling in the universities to drop DEI programs. Some are keeping them, but they realize what's coming. Once the Supreme Court, and this was important, when the Supreme Court weighed in against racist administrations' admissions policies, like at UNC Chapel Hill and at Harvard University, the Supreme Court gave them the smackdown and said, you can no longer be racist against Asians. Everybody, it has to be fair for everybody in the admissions policies. Suddenly, you started seeing people, not just in the universities, but in the corporate world, realizing, okay, we're going to be next. That was a precedent-setting case, and it's likely going to be applied to us. So they stopped having DEI. Once it looked like Trump was going to win in this second administration, and DEI was going to be a target. In fact, that became a platform issue for the new Republican Party, anti-critical race theory. people everywhere started saying, okay, DEI, it's up. It's not at our university anymore. Not at ours, not at ours, not at ours. Now, it doesn't mean the same players aren't there and that they're still not practicing the same things. Many of them are. They're putting lipstick on a pig and they're renaming it. But unless you're going to do like Elon Musk did, and that is buy Twitter and fire 85% of the people and rehire people that are balanced in their perspectives, you've got the same bad actors who now are going to find sneaky ways to get around it. But so yes, having political alliance, from Alliance Defending Freedom to someone in the Supreme Court to a president to right here in the Indiana State Legislature, we just passed the first tenure law that has sticking power, better than what Florida and Texas attempted, for example, and that has begun to take effect. It's not just theory, it's in effect now, that the board of directors and the departments have to give an account for gaining and retaining tenure. They need to be able to see that they're not radical, that they are capable of promoting viewpoint diversity on the university campuses, so that you can have the free exchange of ideas. And through that, you get the best ideas rising to the top. And so we potentially can get people like Christians or conservatives or libertarians to not self-censor for fear that they are going to be crushed and their career is going to be crushed. Now that we have the wind at our back and the support of the legal aspect, people are going to be a little bit more bold. That is what we're seeing. And that's why it's important to be able to have partnerships, political partnerships. And by that, I don't mean just in the law, but we can partner with Peter Boghossian in atheism, or someone else who's a transhumanist, or someone else who's classically liberal, politically liberal in the broader sense, not the Democratic Party liberal, but the broad sense of American or European political liberalism that appreciates free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and debate. Debate is not hate. It's good for all of us.
With this suit and some of the other litigation that Ratio Christi has been successful in, it does seem like the dynamic is changing a bit, that there are steps being made, progress being made in the protection of First Amendment freedoms, especially for religious groups on campuses and in other areas. Is this going as quickly as it should? What time period are we looking at for getting back to a healthy place on university campuses?
This is a long march, Tyson. This is why I'll give you a couple of illustrations. The reason why this recent victory in the Department of Education is important, and sometimes it's more threatening than even First Amendment disputes by themselves, is because it holds money over the heads of these universities. It says that if you discriminate against organizations, that you're giving resources and recognition to other groups, but not to these Christian ones for their beliefs, then the Department of Education can withhold funding from your public university. That is huge to them. That's much bigger than just the First Amendment, because many of these players are second and third offenders. They have recidivism going on. In Iowa, we had to have a third lawsuit that came about. And it was so egregious that the judge gave the university officials a personal smackdown and made them pay the fees out of their own pockets. Another example would be this. We were simply at the University of Nebraska asking for student funding that comes from student fees for speakers to come in. Everybody else was getting it. Can't we have it too? They found out who the speaker was and they cut off the funding. And they said, ideological differences. And we said, ideological differences? It's a university. And this was a philosophy professor. It was Robert Audi, who authors the Cambridge Dictionary of Philosophy. And they didn't even know what he was going to talk about. He was going to talk about the problem of evil and suffering. That's it. But they said ideological differences. He's at Notre Dame and they've got religious backgrounds. They didn't realize that he was also a former full professor at the University of Nebraska, and he was the former department head of philosophy at University of Nebraska. That one was so bad and so easy that even the Nebraska governor weighed in favor of our side in the local newspaper. But this stuff happens all the time. I mean, at any one time, I've got 3 to 6 legal inquiries that I'm dealing with. You would think that it's just easy and that everybody's just got freedom to voice opinions at this place that's supposed to be a marketplace of the engagement of free ideas. It is not. So this ruling here is important because as long as you've got an executive like the current president who put the rule in the first place, if you have an executive that is willing to enforce the rule to say that if you are discriminating against a Christian group and not giving them certain things that you're going to give to everybody else, then we're probably not going to send millions of dollars to your institution. That speaks volumes. And we need to start being genuinely inclusive, not just on skin color and body parts, but about viewpoint diversity inclusive at the university campuses. It's healthy and it's good for everybody, but it's going to take a long time for this to take effect, because even while they've put lipstick on a pig and they've changed their cosmetics so that they don't have the strong government to come after them, you have the same bad players with the same beliefs and the same motives underneath. It's going to take a long time, but it's going to take red states like Indiana to then start copying these tenure laws to just make sure that everybody can participate. It's equal justice for all. What we've had in recent years has not been equality, it's been equity.
Well, I think with the last election and looking at the way the election map kind of rolled out, it does seem like there is a huge turning of the tide, that more people are going to be working towards eliminating some of these prejudicial policies and functional activities in some of these organizations and institutions. So you're predicting a long climb, a long battle. And so we're appreciative of people like you who are fighting those battles and succeeding. So one final question. As one personally who has worked in the field of apologetics for many years, I think it is very important that more university students get involved, learn apologetics, and defend their faith on campuses, especially secular campuses. So you guys are doing a great job of that, and it's been an absolute pleasure to know you as a friend and have so many of our people overlapping in our missions. How can students benefit from and partner with Ratio Christi?
Right. I would say look at us through our website, click the join tab, have a conversation with us. If you are capable of helping us start a chapter, great. If you want to just join a chapter on one of these universities, great. If you want to donate, great. We have a professor's ministry, as well as the student college ministry and a high school ministry. Great on all fronts. Our goal is not the legal. We're not in the business of suing universities. That's what we have to do to partner with those who do, to give them continuing education, just so that we have a platform like everybody else has to be able to debate truth, and may the best view the truth win out. Our hope is, as our logos represent here, is apologetics evangelism, or evangelistic apologetics. We say that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we listen more. If someone needs a hug, we give them a hug. If someone needs an argument, we're the ministry on campus to give them an argument. We saw on one campus, for example, 174 people come to Christ this last year. Our objective is to see souls saved, but at the same time, we want to save the soul of the university, because it's where we came up with Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, and then Calvin and Wheaton and Biola and others and so forth. Christians are the ones who started the universities on the one hand, beginning with a worldview with mind that created matter. And Christians are the ones who started hospitals on the other hand, with the incarnation of Christ, the Logos or Logos, the logic of God. We are the ground for rationality in our worldview and for hospitality and morality. So Christianity is good for the world. It's reasonable and it is true. We just want an opportunity to go in and debate the issues. And we want people to join us because we are not shying away from the big issues in culture, but we are trying to generate, even when we hit hot topics, we'd want to generate more light than heat. But the last time I touched the light bulb, it was a little bit hot. So we're not afraid to get our fingers hot, but we do want to talk about the truth because we think it has eternal consequences.
Before I forget, you did mention that you wrote a book. When can we expect that to release?
The book that's coming out October 1 by Harvest House is called The Miseducation of America: Confronting the Cultural Revolution from the Classroom to Your Community. Talking about
All right.
what just happened to America. Look no further than the campuses. How do we change that? If you want to change the culture, you got to change the campus.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back on to talk about that
Yeah.
more in the near future. In the meantime, I will be posting a link to the Alliance Defending Freedom article that outlines the suit in the description. Corey, thank you so much, and the rest of Ratio Christi for doing what you do. And once again, congratulations on the victory.
Thanks, Tyson. Go team, go God.